Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Blood, Dust and Snow, Chapter 5. June the 27th, 1941. The 5th Company is in an all-around defensive position. Wake-up call was at 2:30 am and at 3 am we drove to Hill 132, where we wait for Abteilung Siebert. It doesn't arrive as there have been some last-minute route changes. Instead, we head down to the forest where the 7th Company has been at home since Lieutenant Vielbaum has been killed. In the forest we then waited for the advance to continue. Theo Langenbruch and I want to visit Vielbaum's grave. He was killed as leading platoon commander in the woods behind Supaicei, west of Bagno-il-Gorzeli. During an engagement with a Russian Mammoth tank, which was standing right on the main route of advance, he was shot through the chest by a Russian sniper who had been sitting in a tree. His grave lies under a big wooden cross at the crossroads. I don't want to write a lot about Werner. He was a model reserve officer. Just how well liked he was is mirrored in the elaborate decoration of his grave. I always got on well with him. He was a pleasant comrade, not just a good one. Now that he lies here under the big cross, his bride in Soldin doesn't need to wait for him anymore. Werner Vielbaum is the second officer of our Abteilung to be killed. I haven't asked any of his men of his tank about details yet. They are still tired from the battle. Together with Franz of the 7th and Feldwebel Jordans, I took a look at the big Russian tank which had been blown up by our pioneers after the battle. It stood right in the middle of the road and blocked the advance of the 7th Company. A burned-out Christie and the wrecks of several other vehicles were lining the road. In the evening we continued. I had washed myself before we set out again, but after only 15 minutes I was just as dirty as I had been before. It has been a terrible day. Sunday, June the 28th, 1941. We drove all night and I am bone tired. There's nothing to help one staying awake, and there at several points I nearly fell out of the turret. Now we are the divisional reserve on the advance to Dünaburg and are standing in the forest behind Svedersei. Yesterday, thank God, the dust disappeared. It has been absolutely terrible up until a thunderstorm brought refreshing rain yesterday evening. We followed the route of the 8th Panzer Division and came across the traces of previous fighting. The crew of a Christie tank had apparently tried to run away. We found their dead bodies a few kilometers further on in a cornfield where we had to halt to eat and drink. One gets used to the stench quite quickly, as terrible as it is. Far worse was what I found in an open building in which another light tank was standing. This one had been blown up as well, and parts of it had been scattered 500 meters into the landscape. That, however, also applied to the crew of the tank, whose burnt bodies had been equally torn apart. There, the stench of the flesh mixed with that of burning rubber, and I made sure we got away from that place as quickly as possible. We continued driving through the night. The demands of the men, not only in battle but also on the march, are enormous. Sometimes the medic issues a few pills which keep us awake, and then it goes on, forward ever forward, without light, eyes nearly glued shut with sweat and dust, thirsty, tired and unwashed. At 2 a.m. we came across a stream, the bridge across which was unable to take a load, and where Oberleutnant Glesken and his gentlemen were directing the traffic by screaming and shouting a lot. While they did so, the adjutant and the commander with his dialect and all the company leaders butted on them. No need to describe the resulting chaos. On the other bank, local Jews had been put to work by the locals. Serves those brothers right. Beards cut off, they can now repair the roads. During the night, we drove across an area where it hadn't rained. We were so tired that we failed to realize that after a second thorough wash, we were now getting completely dirty again. At about 8 am, we stopped to refuel and have a small bite to eat. While doing so, we realized that Oswald needed new rollers on the idler arms of his tank, but we drove on regardless. When we came through the area of Imegala, we noticed that the Lithuanians were flying their old national colors from their houses, green, yellow and red. In the villages and smaller towns there were men in olive-green uniforms with swastika armbands in the Lithuanian colors. I asked one of those men, who to my surprise even greeted me with a Heil Hitler, what kind of wild organization he was a member of. With a radiant smile he explained that he was Lithuanian partisan. A few of these weird forest heinies even carried rifles and were guarding some scruffy Jews working on the roads. The roads, by the way, deserve their own chapter. Unpaved, only covered with a layer of gravel and, in dry weather, a layer of fine, white flour-like dust. And even if there is only a little rainfall, then these roads, which are already marked red on our maps, turn into a mud bath of a kind no one in Germany could ever imagine. In the dust, it's nearly impossible to breathe, while it takes a gust of wind to make the man ahead visible for a brief moment. Behind Svedazai at about 1800, we make a halt inside a pine forest. I have forgotten to mention that Theo Sander's vehicle broke down. Gearbox defect. The transmission shaft of second gear seems to be broken. As such, I had no other choice but to pack up my things and then, accompanied by Feldwebel Funk, the commander of the maintenance platoon, drove over to the boss where I switched over to another vehicle. As Oswald's tank had broken down too, I had no vehicle with a transmitter anymore. I hope Oswald's tank will be fixed soon, as mine will take a while to repair. Fitting a new gearbox will take 2 to 3 days, and when that is done, they will need to find us, which will take a few days as well. One tank, which had broken down 2 days before the first battle, was returned to us yesterday. It had taken Feldwebel Matusek and his driver, Unteroffizier Esser, a while to overtake all the vehicles ahead of them to catch up with us finally. The Russian, or rather Lithuanian or Latvian, roads are at least wide enough. There is enough room. Every soldier on our side knows what the great objective of all this is. And not only that, they have all grasped the deeper sense of it. There, just look at it, all that rich soil, and then there are acres and acres of it. But it's also badly cultivated. In this country we feel like the Goths and Vandals once did, when they migrated from their overcrowded lands and, weapon in hand, sought new soil for themselves. If these people here are incapable of cultivating the land, then they have no claim on it. Just look at the sheep and goats, so squalid and ill-bred. Bring German settlers here, I say. They know about cultivation and animal breeding. There are a lot of things to see here for the Lancer, even though life is not the same as it was in France. It is, however, a great political education for them, for they can learn about the wider plans of the Führer. They can witness the difference between German culture and the state of affairs in Lithuania. They can see the women here going to church in their dirty and grey gowns. Most walk barefoot. Some have wooden shoes, which they often carry in their hands even when going to church. Hats seem to be unknown. At best, the womenfolk are wearing a white headscarf, but even this is usually dirty and grey. Scruffy cats, the lots of them, and many a Lancer can't help comparing them to the French women whose acquaintance we made last year. The children look equally squalid. Wild hair, unwashed and just as dirty as we are after 3 days on their terrible roads. With their tattered clothing, they are lining the roads, with dirty fingers shoved up their noses in devotion, marveling at us as we roll past them in our tanks. The men are also ragged and dirty. They all wear breeches even when they walk barefoot. Footwear seems to be more commonly worn by the men. Most men wear high boots made of soft leather, sometimes the shafts are made of felt. They wear sheepskin jackets or similarly tattered jackets and vests. The Russian rubashka is not often seen here. A clean-shaved man is rarely encountered. If one is spotted, he's probably coming from a funeral or a similarly important event. July the 1st, 1941. It's payday. Always a great day when you are in the army. But what are we supposed to spend it on here? Yesterday night we were in the process of going to sleep, but were still standing around for a while with a group of older Feldwebel. The boss joined us and we chat about the heavy tanks we encountered, the fighting that lies ahead and what one could do with this beautiful country. All kinds of vehicles raced past us down the dirty road, and suddenly our war correspondent pulls up on his motorbike and shouts, "Prepare to move out, commanders to HQ." We didn't quite know if we should be delighted about the news or annoyed, because it had cost us a night of well-deserved sleep. In a jiff, the tents were pulled down and packed up, our outfits prepped for the night march and vehicles made ready. Corporals and Feldwebel in the courtyard were in a boisterous mood. Amid all the jokes and inanities, someone suddenly started to hum a tune. One man after another joined in, and soon everyone was loudly singing the song of Maruschka the Polish girl. Then Krautwurst, Lieutenant Schöner's driver, shoved a harmonica between his lips, upon which it went on full tilt. The farmer who owned the farmstead we had moved into with our company was a Latvian who, during the First War, had been held prisoner for 7 months in Limburg an der Lahn. He stood at the door with his wife and listened to the music. His eldest daughter, a squeaky clean, intelligent girl of about 17 years, whom I found exceptionally attractive, was standing with them. During the day, I'd had ample opportunity to watch her at work. Even with all the heavy agricultural labor on the fields and in the stables, she kept herself well groomed, and some of the more inquisitive infantrymen even managed to watch the girl through their binoculars while she was bathing herself in a stream down in the valley. Now that beautiful girl, whom I had taken to my heart, suddenly approached me with a bunch of sweet-smelling wild roses. She said something in her own language which I didn't understand. I did, however, realize that it was something good and nice, and I felt it too because she kept holding my hand with hers for quite a while in an affectionate manner. I have no idea why these people here suddenly wish us a good journey and lots of luck. The man had of course learned a bit of German during his time as a prisoner. Apart from that, I have realized that the whole area on the Latvian side is a lot cleaner and more cultivated than on the Lithuanian side. The cattle in the fields are premium, brown breeding stock, which is quite a contrast to the small, ugly and unprofitable goats kept in Lithuania. The wooden houses are clean and not covered with rotten straw, but with proper shingles. In general, the properties here are more spacious, cleaner and better looking. The farmer offered us fresh cow's milk as soon as we arrived, and soon after brought out 2 finely cut glasses, which he filled with home-brewed beer drawn from a pretty ceramic pot. In return, he asked me for some cigarettes, as he would love to smoke but could never get any tobacco. He was delighted when Unteroffizier Hagemann issued them with 2 large packets of Russian cigarettes. Franz, the tall football player, without saying anything, gave him a large bag of tobacco which had got damp. He didn't really understand what we said, but he kept lifting his cap while saying danke sehr, while Frank, for the briefest of moments, lifted his cap to return the greeting. We then moved out into the pouring rain, the white roses the girl had given me attached to the front of my tank. A moment ago I had a swim in the Düna, which between Dünaburg and Jakobstadt forms a respectable stretch of water, 300 to 350 meters wide and quite deep. The banks everywhere are nice, sandy and well suited for swimming. The current isn't too strong and doesn't carry a swimmer too far away. The western bank, from Dunava to here, is lined with old German positions from the First War. With our tanks within some of those trenches, we waited for the Russians in the morning, but none had showed up. The whole thing last night was a joke. With 2 battle groups we marched through the whole night, reaching the Düna at 4 in the morning, and an hour later we were sent into a forest to deal with 2,000 Russians. On a map printed in 1884, the forest looked enormous, but in reality it had already been thinned out quite a lot and was riddled with small settlements. Our 7th Company with some Mordschützen advanced from one side and our company with the other Mordschützen regiment from the other. The result? From 6 a.m. to 12, not a single Russian was found. My platoon had been left behind near a road as a reserve, and thus I was able to take 2 Russians prisoner who had been walking down the banks of the Düna. I sent 3 men of the recce platoon out to search the houses nearby, and the only thing they could find was 3 pounds of butter. And for that result, sparked by the omnipresent fearfulness of the divisional staff, we had to sacrifice a night of much-needed sleep. Instead, we raced through pouring rain, wasted hours waiting and burned a lot of much-needed fuel, which we could have used elsewhere. We are now standing at a Düna crossing and wait some more. It has only just stopped raining and everything is already covered in dust again. The company, together with the boss, is having a bath in the Düna. I have to stay with the vehicles in case there are any surprises from above. From here, I can see how some of them have swum across to the other side, where they have refloated an old boat. I can hear them shouting and cheering all the way up here. The crossing point must be nearby. There is flak on all the heights watching for red bombers. Now and then, a few of them appear. On Sunday evening, some flew over our farmstead. They were all shot down by a young lieutenant in a Messerschmitt. Just as the last one went down in flames, he himself was hit by a rear gunner and had to force land his machine nearby. He was lightly wounded in the head. The 3 bombers had been his first victories. We crossed the Düna today over a pioneer bridge near Livani before continuing our advance towards the east. Tomorrow we'll advance further with the Vorausabteilung of the marching group of Oberst Koll. At this point, long columns of riflemen, horse-drawn troop carriers and whole companies of infantry roll past the farmstead in which we have taken a defensive position. I can't help noticing that there are large numbers of captured Russian lorries in use. Wieler, a Feldwebel on the ammunition lorry, is supposed to gain his assault badge with me. I'm happy about that. The man is not bad. Tomorrow we will continue. Who knows if the Russians will stand and fight this time. Thursday, July the 3rd, 1941. For once I had slept well. Up until 8 a.m., Sepansky, the driver, Tutash, my assistant gunner, and Müller, the wireless operator, and myself, the commander of tank number 523, slept like the night owls. Then the advance resumed over the little bridge, past the farmhouse. A few wounded Russians were treated by a few Latvians. Behind the farmhouse stood a Christie tank which Kleinjung, taking revenge for the fallen comrade Eggers, had destroyed during the night. We advanced along the road towards Rezekne, where groups of prisoners came towards us in groups of 2 and 3 at the side of the road. For them, the war was over. Such a rabble of regional soldiers is never reliable. The Russians knew this when they put the Latvians to work in the baggage trains without issuing them arms and ammunitions. The Latvians and Lithuanians wear different uniforms from the Soviet Russians. Currently, the latter are wearing the rubashka and their summer uniform, a canvas shirt of earthy brown khaki color. The Latvians and Lithuanians can be recognized by their long haircuts and the olive-green uniforms with yellow or red piping. Having passed through Rogovka, we turned towards Karsava, where our Kampfgruppe was tasked to capture a supply train, but we were too late. The Luftwaffe had been quicker. Both our Panzer IVs were moved to the heights at the junction to Baltinava and started firing quite a few shells into the village. I would have loved to capture it to find some spoils. But that was impossible, as the road of advance diverted just in front of the village and railway line. Only the 8th Panzer Division would pass through Karsava. We would only touch its road of advance near Gauri, crossing it once to continue our own advance towards the Latvian-Russian border. But even before reaching Gauri, we were tasked to support Aufklärungsabteilung 6, which was employed as our Kampfgruppe's advance guard. We advanced and received instructions. Aufklärungsabteilung 6 had encountered enemy movement on its right flank on the main road from Karsava to Augsburg. We were tasked to hit the flanks of the units retreating from Rezekne across Karsava. Again, I was to advance on the right wing. This I did until we arrived at the main road, on which we rushed towards the retreating Russians. There was swampy ground on the right side of the road, which forced me to keep behind the boss on the road itself, which was lined with the wrecks or lorries taken out by aerial bombing. We followed it for about 5 kilometers without encountering an enemy and then turned around. Some Lancers, following their unfailing instincts, had assembled around one of the lorries where, next to some bales of cloth, they had found a few boxes of pralines, biscuits and chocolate. 5 prisoners have been rounded up and now sit in the trench next to the road. We hurry up and chuck all the boxes onto the tank before heading back to the crossroads when, what the devil is this? While we are distributing the spoils, a Soviet armored car races towards us across the road and absolutely no one is manning the guns. Ours' platoon was supposed to be keeping watch, but they apparently failed to do so. One does become cursedly neglectful out there. Then the armored car is among us, something flashes up, there are shots and crashes, and the vehicle rams itself into a trench 50 meters ahead of me on the left side of the road. The turret hatch flies open and a man in a blue overall jumps out. I open fire on him with my pistol. A few shots and my magazine is empty. Funkmeister Moser hands me a new pistol and then off we charge towards him. But the fellow has escaped, just like our 5 prisoners, over the cornfield into the forest. What should we do with prisoners when the Russians run away at the next best opportunity? Well, one learns over time. Following that, we were allocated our tasks for the night, as there was an expectation that we would be facing enemy forces pushed out of Karsava by the 8th Panzer Division. Prisoners confirm that there are still several tanks and a battery in the forest around the area of the trig point. We might just be a company without pioneers and artillery, but we are the 5th and we'll give the Soviets a warm welcome. My platoon is allocated to Lieutenant Eggert. Together we'll form the lead element. My vehicle is the furthermost on the left side of the road, which descends slightly from Landrinki towards Karsava. Giersig is on my right, Unteroffizier Schirmer behind me. He is to give us covering fire. One of his machine guns isn't working. On my left there are 3 more tanks, 2 of them of the Abteilungslight platoon. Then a group of pioneers is attached to us after all. With 6 rolls of concertina wire and a row of Rampenminen, they create a barrier which the Russians won't be able to pass. On the right of it is a marshy hollow, and next to that a large bomb crater. The left is covered with brushwood. Soon our tanks are well camouflaged, but it takes all my rollicking skills to get the stubborn assembly of Tutasch, Stepanski and Müller to camouflage my tank well enough. That I did the right thing to focus so much on camouflage would become clear throughout the night and the next morning. By the way, I have to point out that it was my assistant gunner Tutasch who destroyed the armored car the other day. He was still in the vehicle and had quickly jumped into the turret to use the always loaded gun. The Russian had then fired on the tank of the boss, hitting the upper edge of the turret. The boss, standing next to the tank, got a splinter in his foot and some flying rivets lightly injured his head. Anyway, now all the crews are inside their vehicles waiting with bated breath for the expected Russians. Now it is gradually getting dark. We are being kept on tenterhooks. I look at my watch, 23:45. And then suddenly, in front of us, a cloud of dust which, even though the road is littered with abandoned vehicles, is quickly coming closer. The fellows in their lorry come closer and ever closer. Now it will run into a mine and, bam, with a loud detonation, the thing is blown sky high. I see how a man is thrown into the ditch, but he continues crawling on. We open fire on him. Then 2 more men jump off the remains of the vehicles. The buggers. Now out of the tank to catch the guys before they report our position. I search the area with Jürgensmeyer, a Feldwebel of the reconnaissance platoon, and in the darkness we manage to catch 2 of the Russians. One has managed to get away. Jürgensmeyer escorts the 2 to the rear, and I get back into the turret and wait. It is gradually getting lighter when a second cloud of dust approaches. We let it close in. The ramp mine barrier is gone, and the pioneer group has gone back to fetch new mines. That means we have to shoot and open up with our machine guns. There's only one man on that lorry who stops his vehicle right at the wreck of the previous one and then tries to crawl away. On the right of his vehicle is a large fuel barrel which has fallen off the other lorry, and that suddenly ignites and the burning fuel scorches the legs of the Russian, whose crawl ends right in front of our tank. The burning barrel then also sets fire to the second lorry, which is loaded with ammunition, tank ammunition, and now detonates about 75 meters in front of us. The explosion sparks a chain reaction, blowing up all the fuel canisters and barrels on the lorry, which has been stopped by the mine. A tremendous spectacle, similar fireworks I had, at best, only ever seen at Hitler's birthday and during the Russian night attack on Hill 121. Friday, July the 4th, 1941, 2 a.m. We kept staring into the night. Maybe we would be able to finish some tanks off again. It clears up sufficiently for us to use the optical sight for aiming. And then the tension increases when there is movement in the far distance. Clouds of dust are closing in, and it is good that the wrecked vehicles in front have ceased burning, so I am not blinded by the flames anymore. And now the dust clouds are coming closer. Through the binoculars and from my elevated position, I have a clear and uninterrupted view for about 3 kilometers. The road is packed with vehicles, but there seem to be no tanks. The vehicles are all camouflaged against aerial observation, and it looks as if there is a whole forest rolling towards us. I wonder, what if they all dismount and launch an infantry attack? The boss radios in. Keep calm and let them come closer, hold your fire. And the Russians are coming closer and then halt their lorries 150 meters in front of me. I can hear cursing and shouting, and then several of them walk right towards me. They have not spotted me yet, my camouflage is too good. Then they start pointing fingers at my position. I let them come closer, while at the same time I am listening to the boss on ultra shortwave. The Russians are wearing white coats and round peaked caps. Only a few carry rifles and steel helmets. Most of them look like officers. Now their group splits up and 5 walk towards the burned Russian, who is lying in a trench 75 meters ahead and is still alive. They look at the 2 scorched lorry racks and speak to the wounded man. Then they start shouting and look directly at my position. They appear to be high-ranking officers, among them a man in a black uniform, apparently a commissar. And while the brothers are still standing there, shouting and gesticulating, the firing starts. A truly infernal concert. An MG-34 on my right fires first. It must be that of Oberleutnant Eggert. In the same second, I too pull the trigger and keep firing, belt after belt. There are plenty of masked targets on the road. On my left, the Panzer IIs of the light platoon of the staff company pour flanking cannon fire on the lorries more than 500 meters away. The Russians in front of my vehicle drop as if they have been mowed down with a scythe. A bit further back, the Russians try to get into cover in some bushes on the roadside. A few high explosive shells I have for them. They now try to get from the bushes across a field into a forest about 400 meters away. On a sports field, it takes about a minute to run 400 meters. Running for 1 minute through a stream of fire of 3 MG-34s of the Panzer IIs will most likely be their end. And trying to cover the distance in a crawl is sheer madness. Not a single one of them makes it to the safety of the wood. Some turn around, seeking safety in a desperate infantry attack towards the right, where the baggage train, Aufklärungsabteilung 6, and the 2 Panzer IVs of Oberleutnant Leonhardt are. The whole assembly is now welcoming the Russians, who are storming forward under shouts of "Hurrah!" When they are 100 meters away, the 2 Panzer IVs start sending 7.5 centimeter high explosive shells towards them. But the Russians continue coming. When the baggage train and Aufklärungsabteilung 6 are withdrawing due to lack of ammunition, the Panzer IVs pull back as well. Due to that, a lot of Russians were able to work their way by foot into the great forest in the north to rejoin their own troops. The lorry column, however, is ours. The vehicles are mostly undamaged, some have been abandoned with engines running. Now, some Russians try at a respectful distance about 1,000 meters away from our elevated position to turn some lorries around and drive away, but that is well in range of our machine guns, so I send a few bells into their direction. That is effective. As soon as someone rears his head in the roadside trenches, the meadows or the road itself, rat-tat-tat, a few salvos, and it's sorted. Some of the gunned-down Russians in front are still moving. Stepansky finishes them off with a rifle. And then, quite suddenly, aircraft. We hear the bombs whooshing down, and for a moment all of us inside the tank are quiet. Where will they fall? We can still hear them whooshing down through the air, and then boom! 150 meters away they come down. Boom! 1, boom! 2, boom! And so it goes on until the 6th has exploded. Tutash is panicking. He wants to get out of the tank because the rascals up there could hit us. But inside the tank we are far safer than outside in the foxholes. Just as we have finished counting the impacts, another of those vultures approaches, dropping its eggs into the meadow on our left. They, however, will be more harmful to his comrades than to us 200 meters away. Then the spectacle is over and a few fighter planes turn up. A reconnaissance plane makes an appearance as well. I fire a white signal flare to mark our position. The sun is rising. A few men walk forward to look for anyone who might still be alive. 2 Russian lieutenants are. I ask the boss what to do with them, and he sends an ambulance motorbike to pick them up. Lieutenant Langenbruch takes my tank to drive forward to film the whole junkyard ahead of us. In the meantime, I am enjoying a few of the captured biscuits and take a few swigs from my canteen. Gosh, I am thirsty. I have now taken a seat in the foxhole in front of my tank. That way, I am less of a target for the more fanatical Soviet Russians in the area. The 2 wounded Russian officers have gone when Oberleutnant Bethke and everyone else who is staying up there in the farm of the German-speaking Latvian woman comes down to have a look at what has happened. On the right there is a basket case who can't walk. A bit further on, another one who hasn't gone stiff yet. Damn, the dog had just pretended to be dead. I kick him in his ass and then push him back to the rear, up to the farm, where a large number of prisoners are slowly gathering. While I am taking a closer look at a Russian who shot himself, a man wearing a square patch with a thick golden stripe, the boss and Leonhardt have discovered a still-breathing Russian in a waterhole ahead. We are trying to pull the poor bugger out. The boss is bending down, and at the same moment the wretch pulls a gun, a revolver, out of the water and fires on the boss, staring at us with a hate-filled face, contorted into a satanic mask. Oberleutnant Bethke throws himself to the ground, and the shot misses him. I pull out my pistol and send a bullet through the Russian's skull, while at the same time he is slumping down under a burst of bullets from Unteroffizier Butler's machine pistol. I am livid with anger. Such pigs! We are trying to help the wounded and they fire upon us. This is the price one pays for our damned humanity, because of which we are treating the scum in a way too soft a manner. I take my pistol and fire a round through the head of another wounded guy. With a stertorous breath, the swine collapses. If I had the pretending Russians before me now, he could have saved himself the effort of walking to the collection point. I'm such an idiot, having preached to my men again and again that we are the nation of culture and that we have to act gently. But here we get our comeuppance for being soft. And we are not alone. At the Dubiza bridgehead, after they had pushed us back with their super heavy tanks, they had put bullets through the heads of our riflemen. And then the sadists carved the hammer and sickle into the chests of our fallen. Nearby, a bomber is shot down and goes down in flames. A man manages to bail out with the parachute. After the Russian has come down and our lancers are walking up to him to take him prisoner, he draws his pistol and fires on them, so he gets what he deserves. Another one, also coming down with a parachute, throws a hand grenade even before he has touched the ground. A second aircraft is shot down in flames, pulling a long trail of smoke behind it. During its fall, the air gunner stays at his machine gun and keeps firing at a German column until the machine impacts on the ground. The brothers we are facing here are active troops of the best Leningrad regiments, and they offer resistance to their last breath. It will take a long time for them to beat their commissars to death, as they did at Minsk, and maybe it won't happen at all. Anyway, the business with the wounded has been a lesson. From now on, there won't be any humanitarian stupidity anymore. In the evening, I lay, freshly shaven and washed, at the entrance to a potato cellar on the grass in the garden. I had fallen asleep while writing in my diary. Suddenly, a crescendo of crashing and whooshing sounds around me. Branches splinter apart, little fountains of earth spurt up, and then a pair of ratas roars over our heads. The beasts have strafed us with their machine guns and, as if by a miracle, none of us were harmed. We keep resting for another hour before we again hear the roar of engines. 3 bombers come over and drop their eggs close to the farm's garden. What a mess. Shortly afterwards, 2 more fighter aircraft turn up, but this time our quad flag has deployed about 1,000 meters away, just at the spot where the 2 ratas now turn around to attack a column of our vehicles. The first is shot down immediately, the other bumblebee falls a few kilometers further on. Seems that our flag is able to do more than lay down curtain fire and finish off tanks and bunkers. I have now witnessed this several times. And after the recent scraps with those rolling shithouses of the Reds, we are all quite fond of our 8.8 cm flak pack. It has become a kind of moral backbone for our lancers. When, in the late evening, the endless columns of our division rolled down the road that is being secured by our company, we received a special mission. At Baltinava, about 20 Soviet tanks threatened our rearward lines, and our divisional staff was feeling especially threatened again. As such, we were relieved of our well-deserved sleep to roll out and look for them. On one hand, that was quite interesting, as we were introduced to a new type of pioneer ordnance, rocket shells, which only have a minimal muzzle blast and which we could literally see flying through the air. The propeller charges at the rear of the huge coffers were spewing fire, and in a steep arc they were falling into the forest in which the tanks and some infantry were supposed to be. An eerie crashing and bursting followed. Bits of wood, branches and earth were thrown up, spinning into the sky. Those shells were incredibly powerful. Back on the road, Hauptmann Saalbach came towards us in his Horch. At the side of the road stood 2 of the 6 tanks which Lieutenant Lög and his flak hadn't finished off. He had destroyed 13 of them with his flak and with hand grenades during an armed patrol. Then we arrived in the area where the buckets had broken through. Visibility was low, and I had to make an effort to see anything at all. In a trench ahead, however, I could make out a dark silhouette. That had to be a tank. I took a look through the binoculars, and yes, it was a tank, and it had got stuck. I tried to take aim through the gun sight, but could not see anything. Close in, have another look, and try again, but again, not able to see anything. A third try, get even closer, take a rough aim at the silhouette in the trench, load armor-piercing shell, ready, fire. We don't have tracer ammunition, so I can't see where our shot landed. It was clear that it had missed. A few more shots. Fuck it, none of them hits the target. On the left, I then spot a Polski tank, one of the runs that the Russians had taken from the Poles. A few rounds on that too. My driver, the fidgety sock, is beginning to see enemy tanks left, right and center, but observing and correcting the fall of our shot, that he can't do. I'm fuming with anger, and even more so when Tutas shouts over that we have run out of armor-piercing shells. There's nothing to be done with high explosive. Theo Langenbruch is next to me and has more ammunition, but he also only manages to score 2 hits on the Polski tank. Behind us an infernal fusillade has started. Our Panzer IV, having heard something about tanks on our left, spotted a dark shadow at the edge of the forest adjacent to us and started pumping shell after shell into the trees. Such an idiot, there's nothing there. Leonhard is a nervous mess. The result? A Skoda tank behind him confuses Leonhard's wild muzzle flashes with that of the enemy and fires. And he aims well, right into the fuel canister, which bursts violently apart. At the same moment, the Panzer IV fires again and the resulting muzzle flash ignites the fuel. The crew of the Panzer IV bail out, there's wild shouting and screaming. Silhouetted against the brightly burning flames, I can see the crew members jumping off their vehicle. Quick-witted, one of them starts putting out the flames with the fire extinguisher. I drive further forward, call over to Theo that I am getting out and grab a few hand grenades. Theo Langenbruch doesn't want to join, he believes it all to be useless. But I then see how Lieutenant Lög is sprinting towards the tank on foot, so I get out too and join him. A few hand grenades next to and in front of the tank, just in case should any of its crew be there. A turret hatch is standing open, a clear sign that the crew has buggered off. Then something shoots at us from the trench. One hand grenade and the bastard is quiet. I also tried to lob a grenade into the turret hatch, but the thing misses. Lieutenant Lög now tries and climbs up the tank to make sure it doesn't miss. What a shit day. It is getting cold and there is dust everywhere. I bid my farewell to Lög, who himself is based at the railway embankment. And then we drive back past a long column of riflemen and anti-tank guns, all of whom have no one to engage anymore. We are going back to Ledinki, where we arrive at 1 a.m, dead, tired and unsuccessful. Another episode done with a few things to talk about. For one, we can see our author's opinion on the Russians shifting after seeing how they behave when he's trying to help them. I don't think this will surprise anyone, but it's interesting to see how he himself, a firm believer in National Socialism, assumes that the Russians would behave in the same way that he does. We also for the first time hear about his disdain for a certain ethnic minority, which he observed as they were forced to build roads with shaved heads. Another interesting take is him taking a swim during wartime in a river that is barely 350 meters wide. As we've learned in another book, this is just asking to be shot by a sniper. In fact, he himself talks about how one of his good friends was shot by one, so he should absolutely know better, even with overwatch by armored vehicles. And finally, camouflage. We see how the Russians did not notice his position until being almost on top of him. Good camouflage is something the German army has been known for ages, and it has been drilled into us as well. Transforming our vehicles into moving bushes was something we'd practice all the time. My type of vehicle, being a reconnaissance tank, was also extremely quiet, so observing a moving shrub that was making no noise at all was something to behold, I can tell you. So, what did you think about the episode? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next episode. Cheers.